It is my great honor and privilege to introduce our guest speaker today, Ms. Sarah Washington O'Neill Rush, the great-granddaughter of Booker T. Washington. I am not going to read the biography that's provided in your program, but what I would like to add is what I've observed and learned about Ms. Rush since March 15th, the day we met. We met at my inauguration. I remember seeing her and her husband sitting in the stands to my right, and I remember thinking, I wonder who that young woman is. She looks like she's really interested in what's happening here. And later I met her and learned that she was indeed Sarah Rush. You will hear Ms. Rush talk about Booker T. Washington's legacy and the impact it had on her life. And you will hear about the ways in which she's taken that experience to help others improve their own lives. And that's what's so important about Ms. Rush's story. She weaves together Booker T. Washington's legacy, his mission, his values, along with her own experiences to help others who need a helping hand. And that's what she's all about. She will tell you about her experiences coming to Tuskegee University and how that transformed her life. All of our students understand what that means, to come to Tuskegee and know that this place is changing who I am. It's helping me to be a better me. And you're going to hear about that story from Ms. Rush. So keep your ears open and listen, because we are in for a dynamic narrative about Booker T. Washington's legacy and how we are experiencing it each and every day through the important work and the life of Ms. Sarah Washington O'Neill Rush. Good morning. I so appreciate you, President McNair, and I first want to thank President McNair for extending this opportunity for me to speak here today in this very momentous occasion. Since meeting Dr. McNair and her husband, Dr. Roberts, I have been so inspired by who they are, not just by their remarkable achievements, but also by their genuine kindness. With this combination, I can't wait to see what the future holds in store for Tuskegee University in this era, this new era of leadership and excellence. To the distinguished alumni, Board of Trustees, faculty and staff, to the students and to the friends and family of Tuskegee University, and to the esteemed family of Lewis Adams, it is truly an honor and somewhat surreal to stand before you today on this campus on this Founders Day. I bring to you greetings from my aunt, Gloria Washington Jackson, all the way from Los Angeles, California. At 92 years old, she is the youngest of my mother's 3 sisters, the last born of Booker T. Washington's 3rd generation, and she is now the last living grandchild of Booker T. Washington. It is an added pleasure that she is still very sharp, in her right mind, full of grace, wisdom, and sound advice. She is very pleased that Tuskegee University has installed Dr. McNair as its first female president. And we are all sure that her 3 sisters, my mom Louise and my 2 aunts Margaret and Edith, would also be proud, as would my great-grandmother Olivia Davidson, who Booker T. Washington credits as the co-founder of Tuskegee. Last but not least, I would like to acknowledge my husband, Anthony Rush, and all of my family who are here today. Without your love and your support, I couldn't stand here and feel so encouraged. Thank you. As I deliver this talk today, I'm going to weave in 4 messages from my great-grandfather. Even though he died long before I was born, his wisdom carries timeless and universal lessons, and I believe these lessons still have the power to change lives today. So the first message from my great-grandfather is that no matter how dire your circumstances, you can never be so far down that you can't get back up again. And as he said, success is to be measured not so much by the position that one carries in life or has reached in life, but by the obstacles which one has overcome while trying to succeed. Often, when I mention that I'm the great-granddaughter of Booker T. Washington, I'm usually met with reactions of surprise, intrigue, and skepticism. Many people imagine that my life must be filled with immeasurable privilege and prestige. Some have referred to me as royalty and others as blue blood, while others think that I might just be a little bit delusional, as if someone of his stature could possibly have had relatives. While these sentiments are understandable because of who my great-grandfather was, I must say that they are a bit off. This is because after my mother met my father, she took a slight detour from the path that may have been carved out for her as the granddaughter of Booker T. Washington. My parents met when my dad was selected as the most eligible bachelor to be my mother's escort when she came to California for the christening of a ship that was to be named after her grandfather. My dad was a former UCLA athlete, tall and handsome, with an athletic build and hazel eyes. And the rest was history. As a result, I have my own little up from slavery story. I say little because it in no way compares to my great-grandfather's beginnings of being born a slave, or even to his first decades of freedom during the worst times ever for blacks in America. Nonetheless, I had to overcome several obstacles while trying to succeed. These obstacles didn't let up until, as an adult, I learned of his phenomenal legacy. Since learning of the obstacles he faced, I continue to be amazed not only by how he was able to succeed, but how he was able to do so much more with so much less than we have at our hands today. For instance, during a time when discrimination was not only tolerated, but it was the law of the land, he was able to strike up close friendships and garner support from some of the most wealthy and most powerful men in America, including Sears magnate Julius Rosenwald, founder of Kodak, George Eastman, John Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and Theodore Roosevelt. Each relationship holds a story of its own. But speaking of Roosevelt, when Senator McCain made his concession speech when he lost the 2008 election to Barack Obama, he said, and I quote, "A century ago, President Theodore Roosevelt's invitation of Booker T. Washington to dine at the White House was taken as an outrage in many quarters. America today is a world away from the cruel and prideful bigotry of that time," end quote. When I heard that, I thought, wow, did he just mention my great-grandfather's name while the whole world was tuned in to this election? That spoke volumes of his legacy. A legacy which included his autobiography, Up From Slavery, a national bestseller that is so inspirational it was translated into over 17 languages and it has never been out of print. A legacy that included his improving the lives of masses of former slaves and their descendants when everyone else had written them off. He did so much with so little. And finally, although I could go on and on, His legacy includes that as the most influential Black man of his time, he was able to attract over 10 million followers. Wise beyond his years, he did all of this without Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Stories such as these have the power to instill hope, brighten futures, and change lives. Had we stayed the course he set, I believe we would be a lot further along than we are today. Sadly, as the generational gap continues to widen, our history seems to become more of a blur. This leaves the door wide open for many to be led by the distractions of this world, which are anything but a blur, including fast money, materialism, social media, reality television, explicit music lyrics, drugs, alcohol, and sometimes even the opposite sex, to name a few. And any one of these distractions has the potential to be a gateway to no return. But the story doesn't have to end there. We can overcome our obstacles on the way to success much easier when we understand who we are and where we come from. And my life is evidence of that. To the contrary, I am also evidence of what can happen when we don't know our history, as I was once led astray by some of these very distractions. And my experience of going astray is just a microcosm of a much larger reality among us. And this is why I agreed to share my story of rising above obstacles in parallel with my great-grandfather's story of rising above slavery, all in the hope that someone will be encouraged. Which leads me to the second message from Booker T. Washington that has to do with the importance of passing down our history. He once said, "Years ago, I resolved that because I had no ancestry myself, I would leave a record of which my children would be proud and which might encourage them to still higher effort." While growing up in Oakland, we were far removed from all of the rich and unique history that surrounds us today. Although my mother was the granddaughter of Booker T. Washington, born and raised across the street from the campus, by the time I was born, she rarely talked about it. She passed away before I could find out why, but I speculate that there may have been at least a few reasons. First, I believe it could have been that when I was growing up in the 60s, Booker T. Washington was probably the most misunderstood Black man in America. We were on the heels of civil disobedience and in the wake of the Black Panther Party. And in fact, the Black Panthers literally began just a few blocks up from our front door in North Oakland. So she may not have wanted to bring that attention on our family. Second, it could have been that she was overwhelmed as a single parent. At times, she held down 2 full-time jobs just to make ends meet. Or it could have been that because my father, who she was divorced from, was so proud of our legacy, and the two of them could not bring themselves to agree on anything. The only thing I do remember them agreeing on was the importance of an education, which might explain why I'm still in school today pursuing my lifelong dream of earning a doctorate degree. And last, I believe it could have been that my mother was just a very humble and a very modest woman. Like her grandfather, she was a tireless worker with an extremely strong work ethic. She strongly believed that people should pull themselves up by their own hard work and on their own merits. While that may not be an all bad philosophy, consequently, and unbeknownst to my mom, not knowing who I was or where I came from would create a huge void in my life. Now, my father, on the other hand, would always, in a loud and a proud voice, introduce me and my brother James to any and everyone as the descendants of Booker T. Washington. But he never explained why he was so excited. So as little children, we would just get embarrassed whenever he introduced us. It was, in fact, the only time we weren't thrilled to be with him on the weekends. When I was about 9 years old, I remember him introducing me and my brother to an elderly man who we just happened to be passing by on the sidewalk. And in his usual loud voice, he said, "These are Booker T. Washington's great-grandchildren." And while me and my brother cringed, the man looked down at me and he said in a kind voice, "Don't be embarrassed. It is an honor to know you and to know that his descendants still exist." Still, I didn't understand why. So for a long time, I would write my history off as merely an accident of birth. By the time I was 11, my father left town, and after that, not only did I rarely see or hear from him anymore, but I rarely heard anything about Booker T. Washington. There was a blurb here and there in the textbooks, but nothing did justice to the magnitude of his work. I didn't know then, but I learned much later in life that my father's leaving had nothing to do with me. Instead, it had to do with the failure that he carried. You see, although he finished law school long before I was born, he was never able to pass the state bar exam. My mother would often jokingly say that he was never able to pass the bar because he could never pass a bar. But he contended that it was due to the discrimination he faced when he graduated from law school from Texas Southern University in 1938. There was probably some truth to both of these stories. Either way, as a child, none of that mattered to me. All I knew that my father, who I adored, was gone. And so was an important piece of my history. This further deepened the void that I spoke of earlier. In the throes of trying to find myself, and with little understanding of what it meant to be a Washington, as a teenager, I would seek to fill that void in all the wrong places. My choices led to several hardships that will follow me well into my adult years. But the good news is, the story didn't end there. Although some had counted me out and others condemned me based on my past, I refused to let them or my circumstances stop me. I had to push past all of the noise. And that spirit probably had something to do with Booker T. Washington's blood running through my veins. He once said, "I will never let any man drag me down so low as to make me hate him." He knew that hate just got in the way of progress. And as the saying goes, hate is like taking poison and hoping that your enemy will die. And that brings me to the third message, which is to be patient, remain steadfast, and never give up hope. My great-grandfather once said, "The thing to do when one feels sure that he has said or done the right thing and is condemned is to stand still, keep quiet. If he is right, time will show it." In the face of harsh criticism and many adversities, he opened Tuskegee at the age of 25, only 16 years after slavery ended. And his graduates were among the most upstanding model citizens of the highest moral character. As were his intentions, many would go on to become business, land, and property owners. In the book Christian Business Legends, they cite that by 1905, Tuskegee produced more self-made millionaires than Princeton, Harvard, and Yale combined. So, for those of you, not you here, I'm sure no one here, but for those who have said that he just wanted blacks to continue to be slaves, I say nothing could be farther from the truth. And if I could offer a suggestion, I would say do your research, look it up, and until you do, it's better to not say anything. As the old adage goes, better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt. Continuing on. In 2019, nearly 138 years after its founding, Tuskegee University continues to prosper, educating thousands upon thousands of great minds. And more importantly, they come back into our communities as mentors and role models for the next generation of leaders. At birth, Booker T. Washington was considered less than a human being. His mother couldn't read or write, and his father didn't claim him. Yet he rose to leave an extraordinary legacy. But for a long time in my life, I missed it. I was running on fumes trying to survive. So what changed? I'm glad you asked. It took nearly 20 years after I graduated from high school to realize that there was something else. It happened when I came to the South for the very first time in my life, and I arrived on this very campus where I finally connected to my history. We were here for our first ever Booker T. Washington family reunion, initiated by my cousins Eric and Ernest, better known as Ricky and Chuck, who are sitting in the audience today. When we first stepped foot on campus, students, faculty, news reporters, community leaders were all here to welcome us. Some were awestruck that his descendants were still alive, and I was awestruck that they cared so much. They were inspired simply by our presence. They asked for autographs and interviews. They asked to take pictures with us, and some just wanted a chance to talk and get to know us. My presence was important to them. Me, the little girl who up to that point thought that my life was simple and ordinary without much purpose. I remember turning to my mother and saying, "Mama, what is this?" I grew up not knowing what all of these people who surrounded me knew about my history. And this experience brought back the memories of walking with my father that day and passing the stranger on the sidewalk who said, "It's an honor to know you." It was at this reunion that I finally got it, and my interest and my enthusiasm about my great-grandfather was ignited. It was here that I learned how important his work was. I was struck by some of the original buildings built by hand, brick by brick, using bricks that they made. Bricks that were of such superior quality that people would come from miles around to purchase them. This was their first lesson in entrepreneurship, and they put the money back into the school. My great-grandfather's wisdom was prophetic, and it stands the test of time. It was just as powerful and necessary then as it was when he was alive as it is today. And today I consider it, in my life and his life, my Jeremiah 1, verse 5 story, which says, "Before I formed you in your mother's womb, I set you apart." And my Romans 8:28 story, which says, "All things work together for good for those who love God and who are called according to his purpose." I realized then, and I know now, this was not an accident of birth, because God doesn't make mistakes. If I may, one additional blessing that came out of this was crossing paths with Verna Little. She has been an angel to our family and in my life in more ways than one. With all of the changes that have taken place at Tuskegee in the most recent years, my first question is Miss Little still there? And when I hear yes, I breathe a sigh of relief. And Dr. Charlotte Morris, she has also been an angel to our family. Without her, our first reunion may not have been as successful as it was. So in closing, I will leave you with this final message from my great-grandfather about facing challenges. He said, Every race or nation that has ever gotten upon its feet has done so through struggle, trial, and persecution. And out of this very resistance to wrong, out of the struggle against odds, they have gained strength, self-confidence, and experience, which they could have not gained in any other way. Although you may not be related to anyone as well known as Booker T. Washington, you are undoubtedly a descendant of someone who has overcome difficulties. And if you're African American, it's more likely than not that your ancestors endured and survived the Middle Passage. So, today, I challenge all of you in this room, in this new era of leadership and excellence, to think about the historical vision that began here on this campus in 1881. Consider how the founder and his first students, all former slaves, were able to do so much with so little. And think about how far we've come since that day. This is what we have to pass down through the generations so that they can overcome obstacles, break down barriers, and never give up and never give in. Thank you, and God bless you. The family would like to present to President McNair a token, and I invite my cousin Eric Hughes to the stage to assist me and give a brief story of our history about this token.
Thank you, Sarah. Founders Day is a very special day for the university and for the Booker T. Washington family, as together we celebrate his many contributions to Tuskegee and to the nation. Most of you Booker Washington historians know that Booker served as an advisor on race relations and federal appointments to 4 presidents, and he was a close personal friend of President Theodore Roosevelt. As Cousin Sarah mentioned in her presentation, Booker's dinner at the White House as the guest of President Roosevelt in 1901 sent shockwaves throughout the nation. You see, he was the first African American to dine with the president and with the first family. Fortunately, the friendship between President Roosevelt and Booker Washington withstood the controversy and endured until Booker's death. So our family felt it was important for us to go and visit the White House, particularly while the nation's first African-American president was in office, and so we did, as part of our 2014 Booker T. Washington family reunion. Although we didn't have an opportunity to meet with President Obama, we were accompanied on our tour of the White House by our cousin, Jay Johnson, who was then Secretary of Homeland Security. And Jay read this message to the family from President Obama. And I'll just read a part of it for you today. In the message, the president wrote, "I send you greetings as you gather for the Booker T. Washington family reunion. Bearing a tremendous burden, Booker T. Washington helped lay stones on the path we walk today. He challenged us to imagine the world as it could be, showing us all that those who love their country can change it. I'm proud to be one of many who continue to draw inspiration from his example. Signed, Barack Obama." We, the Booker T. Washington family, are very pleased to present this framed copy of President Obama's message to the family. We'd like to present this to President McNair as we welcome her to Tuskegee and to the Booker T. Washington family.
Oh, thank you. Excellent, excellent. Gorgeous. Picture? I'm gonna go over here for the picture.